President Donald Trump met with New York City Mayor Zorah Mamdani on Friday. It was chummy. There were backslaps. Go ahead. Tell him what you really think. Am I a fascist? Trump and Mamdani seem to bond over a populist message, an understanding of where you come from in terms of being a political dark horse, winning over the population and understanding the angst of a younger generation. Zorah Mamdani then goes straight to the Sunday morning shows and says, yep, it's true what I think. He's a fascist, Donald Trump.
At press conference with President Trump, a reporter asked you whether you believe that President Trump is in fact a fascist, a word that you've used in the past. You were about to answer, then President Trump sort of jumped in and he said, quote, "That's okay, you can just say yes. It's easier than explaining it." So, Mr. Mayor-elect, just to be very clear, do you think that President Trump is a fascist?
And after President Trump said that, I said yes. And
so you do?
And that's something that I've said in the past. I say it today. And I think what I appreciated about the conversation that I had with the president was that we were not shy about the places of disagreement.
President Trump and Zorah Mamdani have something in common. I don't think it's their worldview. I don't even think it's their vision of America. But I think they see a similar path. I think they see similar issues. I think they have different solutions. And for a while, those solutions made travel together. A fellow traveler, if you will. They see the issues of affordability. They see the rise in populism. On the left, that populism is leading to socialism. Seattle, Minneapolis, Chicago, Massachusetts, New York City. The far left has taken over great population centers in America. As we sat around the campfire in East Texas this weekend working out the world's problems, you could hear something that you might hear at your dinner table, that you might later hear this week on Thanksgiving. You will hear the popular message, the accepted conclusion. You will hear a diagnosis of the present tense, today. The left is in disarray, and the right is in lockstep behind President Donald Trump. But what I see is something down the road, perhaps around the corner. And that thing that I see is that the left is actually beginning to coalesce. The left is beginning to come together. And they're coming together, if not under socialism, then under far leftism. In Minneapolis, major story last week as a huge fraud ring was exposed by the City Journal. City Journal, publication under the Manhattan Institute, after a deep investigation and put out and shared widely by Chris Rufo, revealed that the Somali population, or a significant percentage of the Somali population, or a crime arising out of the Somali population, is enough to shock the consciousness. Huge Somali fraud rings in Minneapolis diagnosed tons of children as autistic, bidding the families on where they could get the biggest money to go get their children to walk into various social services and get their kid diagnosed as autism, would get those families anywhere from $300 to $1,500 a month. Why? Well, once they were diagnosed as autistic and signed up for social services under one of the various Somali charities, then you could get Medicare reimbursement. $3 million, that's how much went from the federal government, Medicare and Medicaid, to population in Minneapolis diagnosed as autistic in 2020. By 2024, that $3 million had exploded into $400 million in autism services through Medicare and Medicaid. A similar scheme was perpetrated on housing services in Minneapolis, housing dedicated to the disabled, housing dedicated to those that are indigent, qualifying some of that Somali population as indigent. They managed to commandeer much of the housing services in Minneapolis and reimburse themselves to the tune of, again, several $100 million in federal aid. Where did that money go? Well, what we learned from the City Journal report is that 40% of the Somali economy, I'm talking about not in Minneapolis, but in Mogadishu, I'm talking about in Africa, I'm talking about in Somalia, is remittances. Money sent from nationals, foreign nationals, the diaspora of Somalis across the world. It totals $1.7 billion. That 1.7 annually going back into Somalia from places like Minneapolis is greater than the size of the government of Somalia. Bigger than the budget of the government of Somalia. Where does that go once that $1.7 billion arrives in Somalia? Well, in part, it went to various organizations and services that had direct ties to al-Shabaab, an ISIS-affiliated terror group in Somalia. It's not a long leap, and it's not an unfair characterization to say Minneapolis taxpayers funding fraudulent autism claims helped support ISIS-affiliated al-Shabaab in Somalia. How? Why? Does it matter? Headline from the New York Post. Minnesota NICE enabled immigration fraud to flourish in Twin Cities for decades, ex-sheriff says. It's all about the votes. It's all about the votes. You don't win mayor of Minneapolis and you don't win governor of Minnesota without the Somali population. Why? You don't win mayor of Minneapolis without the Somali population. You don't win governor of Minnesota without Minneapolis. So you turned a blind eye to something going on for over 5 years, a fraud perpetrated on the Minnesota taxpayer. The Minnesota taxpayer, by the way, Minnesota NICE, put up with this. It didn't crop up overnight. If you were someone who observed, who pointed out what was happening in Minneapolis, you were called a racist. And that charge was enough of a shield to ensure that you had a flood of fake autism claims. Chris Rufo posts on X, Somalis are stealing billions of dollars from American taxpayers and sending cash to terrorists back home. It's time for real Donald Trump to revoke temporary protected status, TPS, for all Somali nationals in the United States. It's time for them to go home. Many people are pushing back on that characterization from Chris Rufo because he uses the term Somalis, saying we don't indict an entire ethnic population based upon the crimes of a select group of that ethnic population. That's true. That's fair. It's also fair to point out that when it comes to the World Corruption Index, out of 180 developed countries, Somalia ranks 179. You import certain cultures, you get certain cultures. That's what you got in Minneapolis. And that has led now President Trump saying he is ending deportation protections for Somalis in Minnesota. You know, of course, that narrowly losing the race for mayor of Minneapolis was Omar Fattah, a Somali socialist, looking to join the ranks of Seattle, New York City, and other major cities across the country who have openly embraced socialism. Instead, they reelected Jacob Frey, simply settling for the same thing they've settled for in Massachusetts and in Chicago, and that is just lurching widely far left. This is the price that you pay. This is what's happening across America. You are looking at the left coalescing around far leftism based upon the very real issues of affordability, with that yellow brick road paved by populism.